Hello, everyone. This is Ben Jackson with the IPA. We are letting folks gather, and we will get started here in just a moment, but we want to give everyone a chance to sign in here, and I see we have more people joining as I speak, so we're going to give it just another minute or two, and we'll let folks get signed in, and then we'll get started. Hello again, everyone. This is Ben Jackson with the Innovative Payments Association. Thank you all for joining today. I'm very excited about this presentation and about our speaker. I got referred to the Better Business Bureau by one of our members who had seen them speak on this topic and about some of the slides and information that they presented. And so I've gotten a sneak peek at this, and I'm really, again, excited about the level of detail and some of the topics covered. And so we're going to be talking about the Better Business Bureau's research into scams and fraud. And our speaker today is Melissa Mel Trumpauer. She is the executive director of the Better Business Bureau Institute for Marketplace Trust, which is a 501c3 educational foundation at the Better Business Bureau. And she's the primary spokesperson for this organization. She speaks to conferences and the media and organizations like ours about the Institute's research. And this particular presentation is about their fraud prevention work and about some of the things that they have done. And as a fraud prevention advocate, Mel has co-authored several reports, including the Better Business Bureau Scam Tracker Risk Report and the Online Purchases Scams Report. And they are launching a new and improved scam tracker this year, or has that already launched?
That launched in November, actually.
It launched in November. Okay. And this enables consumers to report scams and search scam reports in their community. And I'm going to turn it over to her to talk about this research and get into the meat of this. One housekeeping item, if you have questions, please put them into the chat or the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll take the questions at the end. We will be recording this webinar and sharing it out. And I know it's always the first question asked, so I'll just answer it now, which is they have agreed to share the slides. So with that, Mel, let me turn it over to you to take it away.
Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate you all inviting me to speak today. I am going to share my screen so you can see my slides. Okay, can you see these? Great. Thanks again for inviting me to be here today. As Ben said, I'm going to share some findings from our most recent research report. The BBB Institute for Marketplace Trust is the 501c3 educational foundation of the Better Business Bureau. We do a lot of consumer education. We do a lot of research. Our mission really is to foster trust in the marketplace for both consumers and businesses. And obviously, fraud prevention is a key part of what we do in order to empower people to protect themselves and also to choose better businesses in the marketplace. So fraud, I'm going to share a little bit of the research that we just did. And the reason that we're able to do that research is because of our BBB Scam Tracker platform. And you can go online anytime to see that at bbb.org/scam tracker. As Ben just mentioned, we did relaunch that in November. It's been around since 2015. We worked with two of our corporate partners to basically rebuild it from the ground up last year. It is what we call a prevention and reporting platform because yes, you can report scams there, but the other key thing about BBB Scam Tracker is you can also search scams. So you can go in there and search by email or URL to find out if somebody has reported something that feels suspicious to you. So that's why we call it a prevention platform as well. The other reason that this is important is because this is where we get the data for the research report that I'm going to share with you. So before I dive into some of our findings, I did want to sort of point out the difference between complaints and scams. The Better Business Bureau has been around for over 100 years. We're really well known for basically dealing with complaints. And we do have a lot of data around that, and we do some research around that. That's not what I'm talking about today. Complaints are really disputes with a business, with a real business in the marketplace. Scams is what we're talking about today. And what we mean by that is illegal or fraudulent offers or interactions. So it's illegal. These are bad actors. They're not real businesses. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the other thing I'll mention about Scam Tracker is, as I mentioned, as a prevention tool, we do keep track of how successful we are at allowing people to go in there and find out if they're being targeted or not. And we estimate that in 2022 alone, we help people avoid losing about $21.2 million. Since we launched the new platform, we've seen our traffic go up significantly. So I expect that number to go up next year when we do the report again. So we're going to talk a lot about obviously losing money. It's the first thing people think about when they think about scams. However, there's a lot of other things. There are a lot of other things that happen to people when they get targeted by a scam. And I'm not going to talk about all of these. Obviously, you're losing personal information. It can impact your credit. It can, it can hurt your computer, all kinds of things. I think the thing here I want to point out is the lost confidence and peace of mind. There are impacts to people's mental health when they're targeted by scams. And you can see we did survey research as part of the report this year and found that 47.5% of folks said that they had an impact on their peace of mind. And I will tell you that reflects previous years. So it continues to be an issue, not just losing money and other things, but also on a person's mental health as well. And I also wanted to mention optimism bias. And this is part of when we do these research reports, we do them for a lot of different reasons. We share all of this research with our partners and so forth. It really allows us to better understand how scams are being perpetrated in the marketplace, so we know how to better target our consumer education. But the other thing that I wanted to highlight here is that it's been proven that there is optimism bias, which is that a lot of us hear stuff, we hear information about scams, and a lot of times we have this, we essentially think that everyone else is more vulnerable than we are. And essentially, but the research that we've been doing over the years shows that everyone gets targeted and everybody loses money or everybody's impacted. So it isn't one age group that's more impacted. Everyone is impacted in different ways. So it is important that we're out there talking about this. So the research report that I'm going to present to you is called the BBB Scam Tracker Risk Report. And it's really looking at what we consider the riskiest scams in the marketplace. And we look at that not by the volume of scams, meaning we're not just looking at the exposure, which is, so we're looking at 3 different factors. Exposure is the volume of scam types that are reported. In this case, reported to BBB Scam Tracker, to Better Business Bureau. So we're looking at 3 different things to estimate what we consider the riskiest scam types. The second thing is susceptibility. That's the percentage of people who reported losing money. So a number of scams in the marketplace, the percentage of people that actually lost money. And then the third factor is how much money are people losing? So there are some scam types, which I'll talk about, where they're losing, $50 here, $100 here. There are other scam types where they're losing significantly more money. So we'll talk about that. This is just an overall look at what happened in 2022. So also just want to reiterate, the data that we pulled for this report was 1 year of data for all of 2022, and this was published in March. But you can see here, we break it out over the years. You can sort of see what's happening. with exposure overall, we were going up quite a bit from 2019, but in 2022 we actually went down a little bit. So there was a drop, about a 12.2% drop in reports, which is a good sign. Susceptibility also went down. That's again percentage of people who report losing money to scams. And then the monetary loss went up a little bit. So there wasn't a huge shift in 2022 like we saw in previous years. It pretty much maintained, nothing really significant happened. But when we break the data down further, we sort of see some changes. So what you're seeing on this slide here are the top 10 riskiest scams reported in 2022 to the BBB Scam Tracker. And I will tell you that online purchase scams, those are those online shopping scams. That's when you go online, you find an ad on social media, the product looks great, you go and you pay money for it, and it never shows up because it's a fake website. That's primarily what that means. It can happen in different other marketplaces and so forth, but that's primarily what we're talking about. And I'm going to talk about that scam type in depth in just a few minutes. That has been number one for the last 3 years since the pandemic hit. With more people home, more people have shifted a lot of their shopping online, and that has, even though the COVID-19 is no longer really impacting us the way it was, people are still, those habits we've maintained them. We're still online doing a lot of our transactions there. One shift, employment scams, which was number one in 2019, that shifted. It came up from number 3 the previous year. And is now number 2 in 2022. And I'll talk about employment scams and what those are. But essentially, it's folks who think that they've been hired for a job and they're asked to pay for something that they shouldn't be paying for. And then the third riskiest is crypto, which actually dropped. But we've seen over the last 3 years, we saw a huge increase in cryptocurrency scams. And then I'll also talk about home improvement scams. The only other shift I'll talk about, phishing showed up in the top 10 for the first time since we've been doing this report, which was first published in 2016. And another significant shift, if you see romance scams also reappeared in the top 10, that went up from 14 last 2021 up to number 7. And again, that we're not sure exactly why that is. It may be tied to cryptocurrency scams because, believe it or not, we're seeing romance and crypto scams kind of being perpetrated together, believe it or not. And I can talk about that in a minute. So those are a quick look at the riskiest scams. And then this breaks it out by age. And then I'm going to dive into the top 4 riskiest scams. But the other thing that's really helpful from this report is we can see which groups are being impacted by specific scam types. And again, it allows us to better target our consumer education initiative. So last year, online purchase scams was number 1 riskiest for all age groups. This year, we saw a shift, and we saw employment scams move up the list. And the reason is that it's impacting young people. So it is actually number 1 riskiest scam for ages 18 to 34. And those are young people who are looking for jobs. And so it's not too surprising that that's happening. And then you see the shift for the other age groups. Online purchase scams continue to be the riskiest scams for ages 35 to 65 plus. So not a surprise there. You can also see cryptocurrency scams at the very bottom. They're number 3 riskiest for ages 25 to 44. And I'm going to dive in a little bit more on this on the next slide. So online shopping scams, or what we call online purchase scams, again, number 1 riskiest in 2022. And breaking it down, I already broke it down by age and showed you it's riskiest for ages 35 to 64. Also, number 1 riskiest for military spouses and veterans. The reason that online purchase scams or online shopping scams ended up being the riskiest and have been for the last 3 years is because they make up about 30% of all scams reported to BBB Scam Tracker. That's the highest exposure by any other scam type. We get more of this scam type than any other. The other reason, which is the biggest reason it's the riskiest, is because almost 75% of people report losing money. So there's a lot of them out there, and 75% of people are losing money to these scam types. So again, it's those fake websites that people are seeing. They're going in and they're paying money for products, and most of the time they don't see that product come back. Sometimes they'll see it come back as counterfeit product. So the second one I wanted to just spend a couple minutes on too is employment scams. Again, we saw that shift from number 3 to number 2, and we saw it having a real impact for younger age groups. And military spouses, it's the number 2 riskiest for military spouses. So when military spouses are doing their PCS, when they're shifting and they're making their move, they're trying to find jobs. We're not surprised, right? We've heard this has been an issue for many years. So it is having an impact on military spouses. The other thing that makes it risky is it has a $1,500 median dollar loss. So while online shopping scams range in around $100, this one, when people lose money, they're reporting in a range of $1,500 loss, which is significant. This scam type, essentially, I mentioned it earlier. Some of the things that folks are doing is they're pretending to hire people. People will report that they've been hired. They sometimes even start doing the work. Then they'll be told they have to pay for training, or they have to pay for equipment for a home office. And then what happens, this is also commonly used, a fake check scam is often used for this, where they'll FedEx you a check, ask you to deposit into your account, and then quickly transfer the funds from your account to another so they can pay the training fees. And then meanwhile, when it's too late, once you find out that it's actually a fake check, you've actually transferred real money, and now you have to pay the bank back for the funds for that fake check. So that's a very common tactic used. Cryptocurrency scams, as I mentioned, this is something that we've seen increase significantly over the last 2 to 3 years. And essentially, these are, a lot of times they're like investment scams. Sometimes they're involving the purchase, trade, or storage of cryptocurrencies, sometimes fraudulent initial coin offerings. So it's something new. Sometimes people are still learning how it all works. And anytime that happens, scammers will take advantage of a situation with anything that's kind of new, where potentially there's not even a whole lot of regulation around it. So that's what has happened over the last 3 years. This one also has a significant median dollar loss of $1,100. So people are reporting losing a significant amount of money. It not only was the 3rd riskiest for ages 25 to 44, also the 3rd riskiest for ages 65 plus. And then the last one that I'll dive into is home improvement scams. That is the number 4 riskiest on our list. Again, it actually had a $1,500 median dollar loss. Again, people reporting that they're losing quite a bit of money. That one, which is interesting, number 1 riskiest for ages 65 plus. And also number 2 riskiest for veterans, and number 3 riskiest for women. So again, this is when that person knocks on your door and basically says, we're on your street doing work for you. We can do something for you at a cheap rate. If you rush, do it now. And then essentially a lot of people pay cash or a check, and then the person either starts or doesn't show up at all. So anyway, that's a little bit on home improvement scams. We have seen that go up. The median dollar loss is tied with employment as the highest median dollar loss of any scam type. So another thing, this is something I wanted to point out in terms of when we look at age range and how different age groups are impacted. For the first time in the whole time we've been publishing this report, we saw that ages 18 to 24 actually had the highest median dollar loss of all the other age groups. That was a shift. We believe that it's probably related to cryptocurrency because of that impact on younger age groups. But I will say that's a shift. Essentially what we've seen in the past is that younger age groups have a higher susceptibility than older groups, but are losing less money because of the types of scams. But that shifted this year. So I just wanted to point that out, that's a pretty big difference. You can see that ages 65 plus also had a pretty high median dollar loss. They were below the youngest age group, but higher than all the other age groups as well. The other thing that we did this year is part of our survey research in the report We don't collect information from anyone under the age of 18, but we did do a survey research to find out from parents, just to get an understanding of if they were hearing from their teenagers, their kids, if they're being targeted, just because we've been hearing things about gaming platforms and so forth. And so you can see here, when we did that research, that 21.7% of survey respondents said they had children in the house between the ages of 7 and 18. 11.1% said that their kids were targeted by scams. And you can see here that social media, not surprisingly, is right at the top, followed by phone call and text, and then gaming platform was third. So we're going to continue to explore that, because that's something I expect to see an increase in over time. We do break it down by gender as well. One thing I will say about gender is, historically in this report, women are reporting they're reporting more often than men. So about 2/3 of reports came from women. That doesn't mean they're being targeted more often. All that means is that women are reporting to Scam Tracker more often than men. And you can see that under exposure. There's not a huge difference between men and women when it came to susceptibility, meaning the percentage of people who lost money. But when you look at the median dollar loss, you can see that men lost significantly more. When they reported losing more money than women did, which is what we've seen over the years. That hasn't shifted. That we've seen those findings in previous years as well. As far as breaking the scam types out by gender, you can see women and men both had. It's the same finding for women and men. Number one, riskiest online purchase. Number two, employment. The shift changes when we get to the number three, riskiest, with women at home improvement scams, men with cryptocurrency scams. So we do look at military consumers as well. And the reason that we've done that is because in the past, we found findings that military consumers are reporting higher losses than non-military consumers. And so we do have, at the BBB Institute, we have a program called the Military and Veterans Initiative, where we do consumer education for that group. You can see in the latest report, military consumers made up 8.8% of everyone who submitted scams in 2022. Non-military consumers actually reported a higher susceptibility. But in terms of median dollar loss, you can see that military consumers reported a significantly higher median dollar loss compared to non-military consumers. And then when we break it down by active duty, military spouses and veterans, you can see that we have a very small percentage of active duty military are actually reporting compared to the other two groups. But from the data that we do have from that small percentage, we see that they're reporting a much higher percentage than military spouses and veterans, and also significantly higher median dollar loss. So that's something BBB Institute is working on, is trying to reach that group to do more consumer education. And because we had such a small percentage, we don't have the riskiest scams outlined for active duty, but you can see for military and spouses and veterans, online purchase scams right at the top. But as I mentioned earlier, employment scams are number two riskiest for military spouses, followed by tech support scams. Veterans, it's home improvement, number two riskiest, and then also employment scams. So just comparing that also with non-military consumers to see where it breaks out. And then we do break it out by students as well. And this, I will say, for the most part, reflects what we're seeing in the age group 18 to 24, which I already shared with you. You don't see a significant difference in the susceptibility. Small percentage students are a little bit higher, but they're quite a bit higher when you look at median dollar loss. And again, it gets back to that age group that I showed you, the 18 to 24, how they had the highest median dollar loss of all of their age groups. So that just reflects that. And then when you look at the riskiest scams for students, again, it reflects that age group, with employment scams top number one, online purchase scams, and then cryptocurrency scams, which is impacting that median dollar loss because it has such a high median dollar loss compared to other scam types. Another thing that we look at every year is impersonation scams. That is the #1 tactic used by scammers, is they pretend to be a trustworthy individual or a trustworthy organization. And they either text you, email you, but they'll approach you pretending to be somebody else. And we always look at what are the most impersonated organizations or individuals. And you can see here, Amazon is at the top of the list for the 2nd year in a row, although the number of reports for Amazon went down. A group that we hadn't seen on the list before historically was Geek Squad. That actually rose to be #2 on our list in 2022. That would be related to tech support scams. So that's when someone takes over your computer and then asks you to pay money for them to help you. And they pretend to be from a well-known organization. In this case, they're pretending to be Geek Squad. Publishers Clearinghouse is #3 on the list. Those are all sweepstakes scams, essentially pretending that you won, telling you won some sort of thing, and then asking you to pay it up front for you in order for you to collect. I won't go through all of these, obviously. The only other one I want to point out on here is US Postal Service. That appeared on the list for the first time as well this year. In previous years, we've had other government agencies. So it was very common for us to see the IRS for tax scams. The last few years, we saw Social Security Administration. There was a huge focus on Social Security scams. This year, we saw a huge increase in Postal Service scams. All kinds of things that they're doing, but this one in particular was because so many people are ordering things online and waiting for packages at home. So a very common thing was for them to reach out pretending to be the US Postal Service to essentially say, your package, we have your package and we can't deliver it. You need to update something or pay something in order for us to deliver the package, pretending to be the Postal Service. That became a very common scam reported in 2022. So that's why you see that on the list. So, and you see other companies on there as well. Oh, one other thing, Manuel Franco is actually a sweepstakes winner. So that's an individual. So we are seeing individuals that show up on the list periodically. And we've seen other sweepstakes winners as well get impersonated. So they pretend that they're reaching out to share their winnings with you, or, you know, so interesting. So we do collect a lot of information. I'm going to share some information around sort of how people are contacted and how people are asked to pay, because they do kind of show scammer tactics and sort of what the trends are, and it allows us to educate people on what to watch out for. This is just a slide that really sort of hammers home the fact that when you're online, you're more likely to lose money. So you can see that we kind of bucketed all of the different payment types, not payment types, but contact methods. So all the online contact methods we looked at in one way, and then we pulled phone and put it in another category. And then we looked at in person, and we wanted to sort of see the difference in terms of overall scams that were reported versus the percentage of scams where people said they lost money. And you can see here that online was made up the biggest percentage of all scams reported. But really the most significant finding is at the bottom here, which is 76.3% of everyone said that they lost money when they were targeted online, compared to, you can see with phone, for example, it made up 33.3% of all scams, only 15.3% of those that actually included a monetary loss. So just wanted to point that out. It's really important to understand, and that's a focus for our consumer education, is to really talk to people about what's going online, how to be safe online. It's really important because you are more at risk when you're online. Again, looking at contact method and really understanding where scammers are engaging with people. You can see website is right at the top in terms of monetary loss. However, if you look down, phone actually is the highest percentage of where all scams are actually reported, but only 10.4% of phone scams actually reported a monetary loss. You can see here the top 3 places where people are being targeted and are losing money are website, social media, and email. And I'm sure that's not really a huge surprise to anyone. And then when we look at the contact method and we break it out in terms of median dollar loss, where are people losing the most money when they're targeted a certain way? In person was the highest. So when somebody was targeted in person, they're reporting losing more money than these other contact methods. Text message, I want to point that out. That actually has a $579 median dollar loss, which is significant. And I forgot to point that out. I'm going to go back to the previous slide here. If you look here, text message, you can see 12.7%. That actually went up almost 40% from 2021. So that's something I wanted to point out. Text scams are going up in a significant way. So we need to keep people aware that if they're targeted by text, that they need to be really careful and not click that link and respond. And they also have a high median dollar loss. Phone also had a pretty significant monetary loss at $550. And then the other thing is looking at payment method. And so trying to understand how scammers are asking to be paid. And you can see credit card is right at the top of the list there. It's the top payment with monetary loss. Online payment systems, that's those peer-to-peer payment methods. So it could be PayPal, Zelle, all those payment methods are included there. Came in second as the most reported payment method with a dollar loss, and then bank account debit came right below that. So that's an interesting finding. And then when we look at median dollar loss by payment method, you can see here that wire transfer, check, and cryptocurrency had the highest median dollar loss. So unfortunately, there needs to be more done. You can see there is still a $650 loss for prepaid cards, gift cards, even though we're doing a lot of education around don't pay with gift cards, it's still happening. I'll talk about that in just a second. And actually on this slide, if you look, we did also break it down by the most reported payment method by scam type. So not surprising, right? Credit card, no surprise there that online purchase, online shopping scams, if you will, were right at the most reported ones for credit cards, followed by counterfeit products and then credit card scams. I won't go through all of this. I do want to say that I'm going to share the slides, but the report itself is also free on our website, and they will leave you with that URL that you can use to download it as well, because I know it's a lot of information to absorb. The only thing else here I wanted to point out here was the prepaid card. You can see here, prepaid card was used for online purchase, government grants, sweepstakes, and lottery prizes. If you look at money orders, it's actually used mostly for advance fee loan scams, which I think is interesting. And then home improvement, you can see, not surprisingly, check. They show up as the #1 scam type used when asked for when the scammers approach around asking for check and cash. So no surprise there. And age plus contact, we do have some very intricate graphs in the report that I didn't put up here because it's really hard to digest, but it is in the report if you want to look, if you have any interest in sort of breaking out age and contact method and age and payment method. I kind of highlighted here some of the more significant things that we saw in here, which is essentially ages, and this isn't a surprise, ages 25 to 44 are more likely to report losing money when they're contacted by text message. Ages 35 to 54 are more likely to report losing money when they're targeted by website or social media. And no surprise at all, ages 65 plus are more likely to report losing money when they're targeted by phone or postal mail. When it comes to payment method, you can see younger people, as we mentioned earlier, are reporting that they're losing money to cryptocurrency. They're paying by cryptocurrency and losing money. And then the only thing else I'd report on this slide is 55 plus more likely to report paying by gift card. So again, more education needed there. And then 65 plus more likely to lose money and pay by money order. So all of that data is included in the report. So in terms of tactics, as we mentioned, impersonation is the #1 tactic, right? Other tactics that our researchers looked at are carrot and stick tactics. And what we mean by that is a carrot is some sort of promise. We wanted to understand how often these different tactics are being used and how successful they are. And so a carrot tactic is like a romance scam. There's this promise of a relationship, or a sweepstakes scam where they've approached you because you've won money and you need to pay a fee to get that money. So it's a carrot tactic. And then there's the stick tactic, and that's like a tax collection scam where you're going to be thrown in jail if you don't pay right now. A tech support where they say, you know, you need to pay us, or you're going to lose all the information on your computer. And so the researchers did look at this to understand sort of what's going on there. Carrot type tactics had a higher susceptibility than stick type tactics. More people reported losing money to them. However, you can see here that people reported losing less money to carrot type tactics compared to stick type tactics. And what that probably means is the types of scams that are being perpetrated. And so it's interesting to know this, and we're incorporating some of this in our consumer education initiatives and our red flags of fraud and things that you should be looking out for. And I'm almost done here. Just a couple more slides. We did in our survey research also, we always ask to get a better understanding of any kind of cues or behaviors that our survey respondents felt helped them avoid losing money to a scam. And there's a lot of different things here. The #1 takeaway here, I believe, is that 73.9% reported to us that they were able to avoid losing money because they felt something wasn't right about the situation. So they followed their gut. They just felt like something didn't feel right. And rather than continue with the engagement, they ended the engagement, and whatever that meant, they closed the website, and they, hung up the phone. And that was actually the exact same percent that we got the previous year. So it's a pretty significant finding. But it's also important to see here that 36.4% felt that they were able to avoid losing money because they knew about the methods and behaviors of scammers. And so knowledge is protective. We've done other research with some of our partners, and it is important for you to understand scam tactics. And this is why we spend a lot of time on consumer education, not just highlighting red flags, but also the different types of the different ways that scammers are perpetrating scams. And so it is protective to understand what's going on with a scam, and also just know tactics in general and the behaviors of scammers. So it's all of this is spelled out in our report if you're interested in that. And then the only other thing here I wanted to report on is we did ask in our survey research, we were just trying to get an understanding of anything we could see in terms of people who reported losing money to scams multiple times. And you can see that about 39.7% of our survey respondents said they'd lost money once. But then it goes up. You can see some 15.1% said they lost money to a scammer twice. And then it goes up three times. It was 4.9%. The thing when we combine all the data together that was interesting is that people who reported losing money 3 or more times, and we combine all those, the 3 times, 4 times, and 5+ times together, said that they were more likely to be. They said they were more likely to panic during a stressful situation, that they were more likely to feel financial pressure or stress over the past year, or they were more likely to feel isolated. So in other words, we've reported in the past that if somebody is alone or is feeling lonely, and they don't have somebody to reach out to talk to in the moment, that can actually impact susceptibility as well. So those played into folks who reported losing 3 or more times, which is interesting information. And so that's a lot. I didn't cover everything in the report, and I realize I covered a lot of information. But again, you can download the report at our website, which is on here, BBB marketplacetrust.org. You can also visit our Scam Tracker platform at bbb.org/scam tracker. And I would be happy, Ben, to answer any questions that anyone has about anything that I reported on today. You're muted, I think.
Yeah, so took me just a second to get up, but thank you very much for this presentation. I am fascinated by it. I want to sort of take host privileges here to ask you some of the starter questions and encourage people to jump in. But there are a couple of things, and thank you for asking who Manuel Franco was. That just jumped out at me. Like, who is this guy that he's scamming all these people? But
yeah,
I wanted.
He's not a scammer. It's just he's being impersonated. So he's not a scammer himself, but people are pretending to be him because he won sweepstakes. Yeah.
And was his name publicized somewhere that there are people who recognize it?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are some states where you can remain private, and then there are other states where you're not allowed to keep your name out of the news. And so, yeah, his name has been in the news because he won. I can't remember which one, but it was a pretty significant amount of money that he won. And so his name was in the news. And there's actually another one that's lower down on the list that was also a sweepstakes winner who has been impersonated as well.
Interesting. It's a fascinating approach. I see we've got. I'm gonna cede my executive privilege here, but here's a couple of questions. One is very similar to mine, which is this is a snapshot of self-reported scams. Do you have any kind of estimate or thought about the proportion of scams that go unreported, and have you tried to statistically normalize these numbers across the United States?
We talked to a lot of our partners about this, and I mean, I think that the estimate is that we're getting maybe a third of scams, but nobody really knows. I don't think we really have a good idea. We know that it's significantly underreported, right? We're only seeing what people report to us, and that's one of the things we do with our consumer education is we spend a lot of time explaining why reporting a scam is so important, to everyone, not just to you potentially getting some kind of help, but also to anyone else. So I don't have a figure on that. But it's something we talk a lot about. But like I said, I've heard people throw out the idea that we're probably getting less than a third, and maybe even lower, maybe less than that.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to ask about, and this has come up, a good question here, which is when people report that loss, do they say anything about whether or not they were able to go to their credit card company, for example, and say, hey, I had a loss, and they do a chargeback? Do you have any information on that?
We do. We don't ask that in the Scam Tracker platform, but we do survey research on different types of reports. And so on our website, we do have 3 different reports on online shopping scams and online scams. And that is something we did ask. So there is, I don't have it on the top of my head, but if you go in there and if someone wants to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to send you that data. But we have asked, were you able to get your money back? Period. And we saw percentages in terms of credit cards. We saw percentages responding versus the peer-to-peer, because some payment platforms will let you get your funds back, some won't. So we do have a little bit of that breakout in our online scams report that you can see.
Okay. And then this question is asking about the future, which is, have you started to hear questions about the AI voice impersonation where it sounds like, gee, it really is my grandchild calling, that sort of thing?
We're hearing a lot about that. It's obviously anyone that's working in the scam space, it's part of the conversation in every call that we have right now with all of our partners. So it's definitely a concern. And there's a lot of people that are talking about that right now and what we need to be doing to protect consumers and businesses, right? Because businesses are being targeted by this as well. So yes,
I wanted to ask you about that and build on that, because that was a question that occurred to me, which is, this report seems to be about individuals, but do you ever get reports from businesses? These are the kinds of scams that we have been targeted by?
Yeah, in fact, when you go to Scam Tracker, you are asked if you're an individual or a business so that we can track business scams. And we did do a report, gosh, about 3 years ago, all on small business scams. We're looking at updating that in the next year or so. So we do collect data from businesses. They are typically targeted by different types of scams, obviously. And actually this year, next year, we'll probably include a section in the risk report that addresses business scams as well. Yeah.
And with all of these scams, do you get any kind of qualitative data about the kinds of approaches that the scammers make, or some of the common language used, or any of that kind of information?
So we do have narratives for all of it. So right, you can go in there and you can actually read some of them yourself if you go to the Scam Tracker. But our research team spends a lot of time looking at the narrative part of it because it's very enlightening, right? It sort of shows themes and trends that we're not thinking about asking. And so they're picking up a lot of different things that are happening just by watching what the person's telling us. And then there are times when we do focus groups and other research where we're doing interviews, and that's when those kinds of things you're talking about will come out, when they really start to talk about, and we're trying to understand tactics and approaches by the scammers. We're also trying, the other thing, we do have a great research report, a few different research reports on our website that we did with the FINRA Foundation that also looks at mental frames and sort of also things that may impact your susceptibility to losing money. So loneliness, for example, is one. Financial vulnerability was highlighted as one. So we're looking at both of those things. We're looking at sort of things that people can learn from, like how they approach things, and also scammer tactics, and how they are asking questions, we do have red flags of fraud that we do put up on our website as well, which are really general, but they honestly, if you know those red flags of fraud, it covers all kinds of scam types, because things like if it's too good to be true, if they're forcing you to make up a decision too quickly, it has to happen today, kind of thing. You need upfront payments for things that doesn't seem like you've ever had to make like they're just red flags that if you know those general ones, you can avoid a lot of scams.
So then, do you think that accounts for the statistic you showed where almost 3/4 of the people said, I just had a funny feeling about this, versus about 1/3 of the people saying, I knew about a specific method? I found that data point really fascinating, and it made me wonder, are we not doing a good job of educating people, or are we doing a good job of educating people just on the general kinds of red flags that might be out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think my hope a little bit is that we've done enough education that maybe people aren't even understanding that red flag is in their head, and they're you know what I mean? It's part of that gut for them,
Right.
perhaps at this point. But I do think there's a lot more education. We need to be out there more. It's just, especially because scammers they change their tactics, all the time, because one thing stops working once we figured out and we've got enough word out. The IRS scams, for example, they kind of fell off for a while because they were out in the news, and then the scammers move on to a different type of scam that people haven't heard about. So I think it's a little bit of everything. I think that gut feeling is important for people to know that if it doesn't feel right, you have no reason that you have to continue with this engagement. Just take the time, stop, pause, talk to somebody, before you move on. Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of both.
It's interesting that you say that. I had somebody show up at my door offering exterminator services, and at the time it felt kind of legit, but just sort of odd, and I didn't need them. But now I'm kind of wondering, did I dodge a bullet there, even unknowingly? So the last question, and I know that we're running down on time, and I want to leave just a little bit of time in case anybody else wants to jump in, but we have a lot of people on this call who are in the industry, in the payments industry, people who are very, very committed to fighting fraud, to helping consumers fight fraud. And I'm wondering, are there things that you think, based on your research, that the industry can do to help their customers avoid scams, help prevent scams, this kind of, bigger picture work that we might be able to contribute to?
Yeah, I mean, I think consumer education is really critical. And if anyone ever wants to work with us, we love to bring on partners to help us get the word out even more. So yeah, I think that's really, really critical. I think there's some innovation that could be done too. I know trying to be able to intervene so that there's only so much prevention you can do, and fraud prevention, and it trying to come up with ways to intervene, right? If something's in the moment. And I think more and more of those things are popping up where whether it's somebody in the retail store and the person stops them and questions them, there's more and more of that happen, that third party intervention kind of thing. So more of that I think would be helpful. So I think all the consumer education you can do to get the word out to folks. But the other thing is trying to do it effectively, because as I mentioned earlier, that optimism bias is a challenge for us, right? It's like trying to not just give them information and have them turn it off because they think everyone else is more vulnerable than they are, but presenting that to them in a way where they absorb it and they listen. And because that's the other thing. I will say that BBB Institute's working with a lot of partners right now, trying to understand how to do it in a way, and for different age groups too, because not every age group is going to take in information in the same way. So trying to do a better job of not just pushing it out there, but tailoring it to the right age groups and presenting it in a way that makes them want to absorb that information and hear it.
So I want to ask about that because it sparks a thought, which is, you talked about how people are more susceptible to scams when they're lonely, when they're under financial duress, when perhaps they're at a change in their life, right? Students and the job scams, for example. And there is a notion in the world of banking, at least, of being the trusted advisor. Do you think that it would be helpful in a broader sense if people felt like they had more trusted advisors, right? We talk about that third party intervening and just asking at the store, but maybe we do need some sort of a place for people can look to their providers as, these are people I can trust to ask about, well, is this a scam? Is Manuel Franco really going to share his money with me, and maybe not feel embarrassed about it?
That's a really important point too that I didn't mention, which is that's a big part of the problem with optimism bias too, is this embarrassment, and also the importance of people to report it and to not feel the shame that some of them do feel like, I'm embarrassed because this happened to me, and we need to get rid of that. And we need to be more clear that it is targeting every age group, and that people across the board at all education levels, at all ages, are losing money to scams. It's not just old people, which is what the sense that used to be. We have data that says that's not the case, right? It's not just one age group. It's not just people with more education. It's impacting everyone. And so that's another key point that needs to happen is, and also the other thing, there's great research too about how we talk to people about it and how we don't shame them, because there's a lot of language in the scam world where we talk about how you got taken, you know what I mean, and we put it on them, like you're the one that let it happen to you, and that's not true. We have to focus our language more on the criminals and what they're doing. And so anyway, I kind of took us off on a tangent there, but I think you brought up a really good point.
Yeah, and I'm going to share a story that somebody from Better Business Bureau just shared with me about imposters posing as Powerball winners. So we can share that out with folks. I see we are just about at time, but let me just open it up one last time. If anybody's got a last minute question here, I'm happy to entertain it. Okay, well, Mel, thank you very much for sharing all of this. And certainly we will check in with you in the future as more research comes out and make sure to share that with our members. And our attendees can see your email there up on the screen and the links to the scam tracker and the report. And we encourage everyone to look at that. And we hope that those numbers, you said it wasn't a significant drop, but a 5% drop is a 5% drop. And we hope that we keep seeing those numbers fall. So thank you again very much for coming and presenting today.
Thank you, Ben. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.